morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am pleased to open today's session with a panel that has become a standing item in the Commission's agenda. The objective of the discussion is to hear from states and other users of UNCITRAL the need for and the impact of technical assistance and capacity building activities delivered by the Secretariat. As you are aware, UNCITRAL's technical assistance are intended to support states to use, implement, and interpret UNCITRAL texts in the way that the Commission intended when drafting them. This panel discussion will focus on these activities in the context of MSME recovery from the COVID-19 economic shock and the vital contribution of a high-quality enabling commercial law framework to support them in the application of UNCITRAL texts. As we heard in the Africa Forum, a side event of the Commission session, MSMEs, particularly micro businesses in Africa, many of which are family-owned or run by women entrepreneurs, have been hit hard from the consequences of the COVID pandemic. This situation is universal and replicates all over the world, but has extreme consequences for developing countries, especially those in Africa. I am pleased that the Commission can examine how it can help them recover. I now give the floor to Madame Caroline Nicholas, Head Technical Assistance Section, Senior Legal Officer of the Secretariat, who will moderate the panel. She will introduce you to the program and explain some general housekeeping matters. Madame Nicholas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here to our technical assistance panel this morning. We will have two discussions. The first focusing on, as the Chairman has just said, the critical role of MSMEs in recovery from the COVID-19 economic shock. And secondly, we will then enjoy a panel celebrating UNCITRAL days, about which you will hear more in a moment. And those are, it's a series of events introducing UNCITRAL to a broader audience. So turning to the first panel, and by way of context, and as the Commission will have heard during 3 weeks of this session, UNCITRAL's legislative texts and its ongoing work to support MSMEs engages the entire business cycle. So from starting and registering a business, considering access to credit, access to markets, including through e-commerce, settling commercial disputes, and the eventual exit from the market. And today we're going to listen to policymakers, experts, and users of UNCITRAL texts who are going to talk about their good practices and experiences in implementing national reforms to assist MSMEs in both their economic development generally and the financial recovery from the effects of the pandemic. And they're going to talk about how UNCITRAL's legal instruments have assisted them in these endeavours and, where necessary, where they would like further support from UNCITRAL. As the Chairman has mentioned, I will introduce each panellist individually, and just by way of recap, when I do so, they should raise their hand to be able to speak. I'd also like to welcome everybody, particularly given it's the last day of the Commission session. We're really pleased to see so many states and partners wishing to talk. It does mean, however, that our time is limited, so I will be fairly strict in asking people to respect the time that's been allotted so that everybody has the opportunity to talk. Also, just by way of housekeeping matters, any PowerPoints and videos will be operated by conference services, so please remember to ask them to move to the next slide. And for those who find that the time is insufficient to be able to present everything they would like, we will make available, with your agreement, all materials on the technical assistance part of the UNCITRAL website, so none of your valuable points will be lost. I will first ask 4 countries from Africa, Asia and Latin America to share their approach to supporting the recovery, focusing on the steps they're taking to support MSMEs and the importance of an effective commercial law framework. We've also invited a partner organisation in our technical assistance activities, the World Bank, and a donor and supporting organisation, the German cooperation agency GIZ, to talk about their work in the UNCITRAL context and discuss current projects and their anticipated impact. And I'll then ask for 2 further countries to comment on what they've heard and to discuss their use of UNCITRAL's tools for supporting economic recovery. So thank you very much, and I'm now delighted to move to the technical aspects of the panel this morning. And we're first going to hear from Côte d'Ivoire. I will just continue in French. De la part de Monsieur Marcelin Zanzou, Ministère de la...
Mr. Marcelin Zanzou, Ministry of the Promotion of SMEs and Transformation of the Informal Sector.
Give the floor to our panelist from Côte d'Ivoire on digital transformation. We understand that Côte d'Ivoire has modernized and reformed the MSME registration mechanism to ensure efficient and quick response measures in the time of COVID. Do you think you might share with us details of this timely reform in your country? Thank you, sir. You have the floor.
Merci, madame.
Thank you very much, madam. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to take the floor and share with you the experience of Côte d'Ivoire when it comes to assisting the private sector, in particular the MSMEs, during COVID. First, though, I would like to convey a warm hello from the President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, as well as from the Minister of MSMEs, who is very pleased with the holding of this session of UNCITRAL. This is also why we've taken such large part in the work of the Commission over the entire session. It's true that COVID, first and foremost, has been a serious economic crisis, not just a health one. It has undermined the already weak economic structures in our country. We haven't waited, though, to take action. We have sought our own recovery, and since March 2020, we have adopted robust measures. The former Prime Minister at that time gave very firm instructions to ensure that efforts be undertaken so as to explore all possibilities of backing the private sector. This would be through more than 1.7 billion CFA francs. That's more than 3,000, about 3 million euros, if I've calculated correctly. The goal has been to provide lasting and efficient support to the private sector through the envelope that I mentioned before. 10% of it is to go solely to MSMEs. 150 billion CFA francs to this sector. This demonstrates the significance of the assistance that the state is providing to SMEs, in particular as 80% of the sector at the time were simply SMEs. This is why we've undertaken financial measures, technical assistance, legislative provisions and also regarding the current legal framework. 2 immediate funds set up to assist MSMEs. So the fund for supporting MSMEs and then the fund of support for the informal sector. The informal sector is simply a reality. There are some SMEs continuing to work in the informal sector. They couldn't simply be left to their own devices. They needed assistance. And when you look at the number of formally constituted SMEs and the number that remain in the informal sector, it's sort of an iceberg principle. It's like you see the tip of it, but what's underneath is really quite a lot more vast than what you see on the tip. So there may be plenty formally registered, but the number of those in the informal sector and thus not registered and providing employment, well, we're talking about just about 4 times more MSMEs in the informal sector, so without formal registration. For us, this is a potential source of contribution to state resources, but also a potential source of employment. So it's important to assist this sector in the immediate future and then see how it could be registered or formalized. And that's why we established all of these legislative provisions and adopted them, such as the statute of the entrepreneur. That's an example. The goal was to ensure that the MSMEs can extricate themselves from this crisis and then be provided access to the funds established by the state. This is again to provide assistance to those in the informal sector and those formally registered. If you like, this was a way of incentivizing those in the informal sector, incentivizing them to be registered. We established an identification program for MSMEs. After having done all of this, we realized that the financial resources that had been made available in spite of access measures, which were extremely streamlined, MSMEs continued to experience difficulty. So we wondered, why are they still having difficulty accessing these financial resources? When we took a closer look, we saw that there was a genuine issue of governance in the MSMEs and capacity building. This is why we established programs with technical assistance aspect to assist in the recovery of the MSMEs and ensuring that they could have access to the funds we'd made available. One of the minimum conditions for access to the funds was, at the very least, having a financial declaration of existence. It was quite difficult for the MSMEs to be providing that and even to be up to date in terms of their financial statements. We didn't want to be in a role of tax collector. That would just have made them run away. We weren't trying to look like some kind of a tax collector. So, yes, we were putting public money on the table to assist these MSMEs, but we couldn't do so and say at the same time, sure, take the money, but you'll be taxed. We have something like a common pot, which means that, yes, you pay taxes, but the idea is that these monies later go on to support MSMEs and their colleagues in times of need. Well, later on, we decided on rescue measures, MSME rescue measures. The idea being there were commitments on both sides. MSMEs had to make good on their commitments to banks as well. You know, this was affecting all sectors, transportation, banks, restaurants, and so on and so forth. But one of the first measures that we undertook was to approach the West African Central Bank. That bank decided to freeze the reimbursement of all credits to MSMEs in Côte d'Ivoire. Second, it decided to allow MSMEs and banks to refinance, to bring these financial resources for refinancing at the central bank. And then, during the Council of Ministers, it was decided that there would be a safeguarding measure undertaken with respect to MSMEs. These are measures that we undertook later. What was just adopted on UNCITRAL, well, the one on insolvency, it was along those lines, basically trying to address both sides of the equation, identify best practices, and fortify both sectors for the future. By way of conclusion, as I only have 10 minutes, I would just say that for us, this crisis has been one that has sped up processes within the MSME and the private sector. Something that might have taken quite a lot of time in another context to assist MSMEs was done in less than a year with the support of our technical partners. This is, of course, the time at which I would like to thank our technical partners, in particular the World Bank, providing crucial support to the Ministry of Promotion of MSMEs. That is my summary of our experience regarding MSMEs during this very difficult time of COVID. We remain available to continue our exchanges, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting. It was very interesting to hear your brief comments on what it means to support the MSMEs, because we know that theory and practice are two different things. This is very important. Of course, we could go on at length, but we have very little time. For that reason, I will give the floor to the next speaker.
So thank you very much for those very interesting remarks. And now we will turn to a colleague from Thailand to hear the experience from a completely different region. So I'd like to offer the floor to Ms. Napanang Ekukara, forgive my pronunciation, who is a senior economist at the International Department in the Bank of Thailand, who's going to focus on the measures that Thailand has taken in alternative dispute resolution to enhance access to justice for small and medium-sized enterprises and micro-enterprises and financially distressed borrowers using mediation. Thailand has a lot of other measures that might be very interesting for us to hear about that we don't have time to cover this morning. And so, given the 10 minutes that's available, we know that there are other points, and we'll be delighted to include those on our website. So, Madam Ekukara, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Sawadee ka. Greeting from Thailand. My name is Napana Ekukara or Mandy. It is an honor to be here. Thank you for having me this morning. I am currently working for the Central Bank with the Debt Management Special Unit. This unit is established to deal with debt crisis. COVID-19 crisis is one of the greatest and most unprecedented challenges that we have since the Tom Yum Goong crisis in 1997. Today, I'm very pleased to share with you how the Central Bank has taken the advanced steps towards an integrated collaboration between all stakeholders and relevant authorities in order to mitigate the difficulties and speed up the recovery. The Bank of Thailand has prioritized debt resolution as the #1 objective. Ever since then, our unit has been urgently focused on tackling the debt crisis for businesses and individuals. We know that for the society, a fast and robust recovery means minimizing the economic scars on the lives of our citizens. As such, we believe that the integrated approach between government agencies is a powerful and a very effective tool. Our team have examined the real pain points and endeavor to provide solutions which are practical, manageable, and at the same time ambitious. Legal advice and financial knowledge, as well as the structural reform of the system, are all needed here. Ultimately, we believe that apart from financial literacy, responsible lending, we believe that debt resolution and debt in this crisis, both individuals and MSMEs are all vulnerable to 90.5% in Asia. The study shows that Thais have begun having debt earlier in their lives and continue to carry such burdens until the old age. About 42% of household debt stems from credit cards and personal loans, which impedes the creation of wealth. This figure includes debt incurred by business owners who are unable to seek funding through the traditional banking system, resulting in them seeking working capital via personal loans and credit cards. Currently, the third wave of COVID-19 has worsened the situation in Thailand, and this definitely delays and prolongs the recovery. In order to officially handle the situation, we have significantly extended and strengthened our cooperation with relative authorities, notably the legal institutions. As a result, we have concluded 3 Memorandum of Understandings with all 3 pillars of the legal system, namely the Courts of Justice, the Ministry of Justice, and the Office of the Attorney General, bridging the financial and the legal worlds together to tackle this urgent matter. As a team with shared common values, we attentively seek to reduce injustice, inequality, and exploitation, to promote laws and regulations on ADR, as well as responsible lending, and to be at the forefront to address long-lasting structural weaknesses and obstacles in the systems. The contents of the MOUs include: first, promotion of mediation mechanism. We are so fortunate that new laws regarding mediation came into force in 2019 and 2020, respectively. Namely, the Mediation Act and a new amendment of the Civil Procedural Law on pre-litigation mediation. Second, the exchange of knowledge and information. We have educated hundreds of legal personnel who are involved with financial disputes mediation, such as judges, mediators, and court officers. Third, the collaboration to set up a fairer and a standardized guidelines for financial cases. We successfully launched many initiatives. For example, the Debt Mediation Fair for unsecured loans and auto loans, which has supported more than 700,000 accounts in negotiating with their creditors. We also introduced a more efficient, fairer, and standardized form of debt mediation where the repayment ability and debtors' conditions are taken into account. So, throughout the entire debtors' journey, we promote the mediation mechanism by means of relevant existing laws. Regardless of their legal status, whether the case is still in pre-litigation process, during the court proceedings, or even after the judgment is given. Our team firmly believes that this method of providing a second chance to troubled debtors is essential for relieving the ever-increasing financial burdens due to this crisis. For an emerging economy like Thailand, the MSME sector has a crucial role in economic growth and development. Therefore, together with our key partners, we are undertaking various plans and projects, especially designed to tackle the core structural issues, channel more liquidity into the system, and remove any obstacles in the legal and financial systems. Here, I'm delighted to say that everyone here in this conference will be the first to hear that our National Committee on Debt Resolution meeting, chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister, which was held yesterday, will announce that mediation for financial disputes and debt restructuring for specialized financial institutions and SMEs will now officially be included in our national agenda. Ultimately, all the above form a concrete foundation for the Bank of Thailand's next steps to further tackle MSMEs debt. We aim to replicate the successful models for unsecured loan mediation to address similar problems that the MSMEs debtors are facing by means of this mechanism. And the plans for MSMEs recovery include SMEs protection. So any laws and regulations concerning consumer protection shall apply to MSMEs businesses in fairly manner. Repayment scheme modification is another key to success. Moving away from creditors-driven schemes, which contains impractical and relatively strict conditions, to a more realistic and affordable scheme would enable debtors' servicing ability and recovery. More incentives for financial institutions shall be given to those participants in our future projects. For instance, higher market conduct rating or taxes and fees reduction. And in addition to this, we are also considering these additional measures, namely the collateral-based approach, preemptive measures, as well as a law reform on relevant legislations, especially for SMEs rehabilitation. And most importantly, with our close relationship with the courts of justice, the President of the Supreme Court herself just visited us. She came and spoke to the governor and executives. We are so grateful. We are developing a new joint mediation center called TBMC, Thailand Business Mediation Center, especially designed to promote litigation mediation for MSMEs. And thank you very much. That is the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eik Ukara. I think that was a very interesting, perspective on how to provide effective access to justice for small businesses and financially distressed borrowers using this tool of mediation and avoiding the long and expensive process that is adversarial dispute resolution. So thank you for that. And we are aware that Thailand has other measures, and we will make those available to those who are interested, as I mentioned earlier on. So thank you very much. Now moving swiftly, as I must do, to our next speaker, we are going to hear from Mr. Juan Pablo Libiano, who is the Superintendente of Societies in Colombia. Now, unfortunately, he can't be with us live today, but we're going to hear a video from him, and he's going to be talking about his involvement in implementing emergency legislative changes in the insolvency context to address the pandemic issues. And he's going to share with us some details of that reform. So thank you for playing the video. Thank you. I see we have some technical difficulties. I'm sure our wonderful colleagues will be able to resolve those shortly. Thank you. Yes, I think we are having difficulties with both with the sound. So we will see if we can come back to the video shortly, and I ask for Colombia in particular's indulgence and the understanding of everybody. We know that sometimes these technical difficulties are insurmountable in a short period of time. So while we try to resolve that, I would like to turn to our next speaker, and we're going to return to Africa for this. And once again, I will continue in French. We are going to hear from Monsieur Buremo Uderagogo, who is the Directeur de la Promotion des PME dans le ministère de l'Industrie, du Commerce et de l'Artisanat au Burkina Faso. Monsieur, vous...
Sir, could you talk to us about the SME support measures, the legal support measures rather than the financial measures that were recently implemented, as well as the relevance of UNCITRAL texts in this regard, regarding the establishment and registration of such an enterprise, access to credit, market access, the settlement of trade disputes, and insolvency. Referring to OHADA texts could also be addressed in this context. Thank you very much. You have the floor, sir.
I think we need to wait, my apologies, for him to be properly connected. He's got connection problems. Okay. Merci, monsieur. À vous la parole.
Thank you very much, sir. You have the floor.
I think perhaps our commercials are so we will go back a stage, and we hope that we have the video now working from Colombia. And again, I ask for the indulgence of the participants while we address these technical issues. Thank you.
It is a privilege to have been invited to share with you the legislative emergency changes made by Colombia in the insolvency statute as a result of the world pandemic generated by the COVID-19. No one would have ever anticipated a global situation with such devastating, unbearable, and long-lasting effects in the overall well-being of the population and businesses worldwide. And never had I considered having to face such unexpected situation as the head of the Superintendency of Companies, an institution which not only has administrative competences to oversee compliance of corporate laws, but also manage all businesses' insolvencies as a judge. In fact, using historic financial information of 15,000 companies, the superintendency identified companies' risks of insolvency with two scenarios in which the GDP were to decrease. The result showed that between 18 to 37% of the companies in the sample had risks of insolvencies and a catastrophe, considering Colombia had 1.6 million registered businesses and a large informal economy. The study also concluded that micro and small businesses would have been most likely to have risks of insolvency than medium and large businesses. Thus, when the pandemic started, the superintendency presented to the government two proposals to include tools in the insolvency regime to deal with the emergency. These proposals were developed taking as basis the superintendency's roundtables in 2019 as part of the commemoration of its 18th anniversary, where we worked with business and insolvency law experts and considered the recommendation of the draft paper for micro and small enterprises of UNCITRAL. These proposals became Decrees 560 and 7072 of 2020 due to the special powers granted to the government to deal with the emergency. Decree 560 created two procedures with minimum intervention of the insolvency judge: an emergency negotiation of reorganization agreement, we call it NEAR, to be held directly between debtors and creditors, and an enterprise reorganization agreements procedure, we call it PRES, to be held in the Chamber of Commerce with the intervention of a mediator. Both procedures require a judicial validation and have a time frame of 3 months to negotiate and present an agreement for validation. Decree 7072 creates an abbreviated reorganization and a simplified judicial liquidation processes for micro and small enterprises with reduced procedural formalities and timeframes. The decrees for all processes and procedures only require for admission a check control of documentary completion and include financial tools to finance and alleviate debtors, deep finance and other tools, the use of technology and artificial intelligence, and flexibilization of assets conversion and disposal as a public auction, among other facilities. These decrees supplement the general statute of insolvency, and general principles of insolvency law apply in these processes and procedures as well. The following are some of the most important and basic principles that Colombia incorporated in these decrees which considering the recommendations of the draft text for micro and small enterprises, not without mention that Colombia's General Statute of Insolvency already contains many of the recommendations of the UNCITRAL Legislative Guide on Insolvency Law. First, key objectives of a simplified insolvency legislation. Colombia enacted a simplified insolvency regime in Decree 7072 that includes an expeditious, simple, and flexible procedure for micro and small enterprises, easy access with the use of electronic standard formats, and flexible check of basic documentary completion and tools to preserve investment and employment where a reorganization is possible. Second, a scope of a simplified insolvency regime application to all MSEs. According to Decree 7072, simplified regime is available to all commercial businesses, legal and natural persons. This includes not only companies, but also non-merchants which are controllers of companies. To qualify, debtor must have assets of less than $1.2 million. Third, types of simplified insolvency proceedings. Decree 7072 allows to have both a reorganization and a liquidation simplified processes. Four, institutional framework. Recommendations state the need to define and specify the competent authority and its functions. Moreover, it is suggested to have specialized judges on insolvency matters that rule on the admission, opening, dismissal, and closing the process, that recognize or reject credits presented by creditors, notify decisions, oversee the entire process, and verify the approval of agreements by creditors, among other duties. In accordance, Decree 7072 appointed the Superintendency of Companies as the judge of micro and small businesses insolvencies with all those powers, as they are included in the Insolvency Law Statute. 5. Support for the use of a simplified insolvency regime. Recommendations also suggest the adoption of measures that facilitate access to, process, and the use, among others, of standardized forms and templates with mechanisms for automatic verification of errors, for the presentation of online applications. This would, at a minimum, allow the information provided by the applicant to be stored electronically in a database. In order to undertake a holistic approach to ease the burden of an application and address all needs, as permitted by Decree 7072, the Superintendency created the insolvency module in its web page. Applications for admissions for all simplified proceedings are to be presented and processed through a portal, which is a web tool with artificial intelligence so that users can fill out easily standardized templates and formats and submit their application for admission virtually, therefore reducing paperwork and associated costs for debtors. Other benefits of using the insolvency module are biometric authentication of users, and automatic error checking and visual aids, tool tips, which help the presentation of the admission and guarantee immediate organization of data. 6, main features of the simplified insolvency regime. In a nutshell, given the limit or the time limit, the abbreviated reorganization process is more agile, with shorter terms and with fewer procedural stages. So it is fully set forth in only 2 hearings, being the first a conciliation meeting, hearings that facilitate claims, resolutions, and guarantee the participation of all creditors directly in the hearings. The simplified liquidation process is more agile, with shorter terms and with fewer procedural stages, and include new tools for assets conversion and creditors payment. Debtor must prepare financial information based on the net settlement value as mandated by international financial reporting standards, which avoids the need to make new appraisals. Now, I would like to present some of the key numbers regarding insolvency proceedings in Colombia administered by the Superintendency of Companies. A total of 1,628 filings to initiate insolvency processes and procedures have been presented from April 1st, 2020 to June 24th, 2021. 78% for reorganization and 22% for liquidation. 18% of the filings are for the judicialized procedures of Decree 560. 56% of the filings are for processes of Decree 7072 for micro and small businesses with assets of less than $1.2 million. 26% of the filings are for regular insolvency processes. Admissions of the proceedings due to technological and administrative changes in the superintendency are taking less time than before. Admissions used to take between 8 to 12 months in 2018. Nowadays, admissions take between 2 weeks and 1.5 months. Regarding the duration of the simplified insolvency processes, the abbreviated reorganization process takes an average of 5.5 months, and the simplified liquidation process 6 months. This is a substantial reduction, as the regular reorganization process takes an average of 20 months, and a regular liquidation process an average of 22 months. To conclude, I would like to highlight that due to the economic crisis generated by the pandemic and its major effects on micro and small businesses and their special needs, and the evident good experience Colombia has had with a simplified regime for micro and small enterprises, it is highly recommended that the UNCITRAL, Group 5th, and the Commission finish, approve, and make available to all countries these recommendations, as they will be very helpful to make legislative changes that would allow countries to cope with this crisis. Thank you very much for the opportunity and your time.
Thank you very much to Colombia, and I think what is really interesting to hear here is that now in 3 continents, so in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia, we have some emphasis on exactly the same points: the need for agility, the need for dedicated, simplified measures, and the need for speed in supporting SMEs so that they are receiving the financial and other support they need while they still are able to take advantage of it. So that was very, very interesting to hear the perspective from this part of the world.
I believe that... Do we have Burkina Faso? No.
Unfortunately... Non, il est là. On revient...
Then perhaps...
It seems that our colleague from Burkina Faso, he may be here. Je vous donne la parole au cas...
Let me give you the floor to see if we can hear you, Burkina Faso.
No. I think the connection is coming and going. Burkina Faso? We will try again later with our colleague from Burkina Faso. How disappointing. As I mentioned at the outset, after hearing from countries, we're going to take some perspectives from the donor community. And the first of our donor community who's going to talk is a representative of the World Bank. It's Ms. Antonia Menezes, who is a senior financial sector specialist in the insolvency area. And the World Bank has an insolvency and debt resolution, finance, competitiveness and innovation global practice through the International Finance Centre. And I think listening to that title, you can hear how the various issues we've talked about all come together. So I'm hoping that Antonia is available, and I hand the floor to her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. As we've heard today, the pandemic has greatly affected firm liquidity and their prospects for survival. A recent report by the Bank for International Settlements underscored the magnitude of the threat, estimating that 50% of firms do not have enough cash to pay debt servicing costs over the coming year. Micro and small businesses in particular are less resilient and account for 90%, that's 90, of private sector businesses in developing economies. Even before the pandemic, these businesses faced significant challenges with accessing credit. For instance, the World Bank estimated that small businesses faced a $5.2 trillion funding gap. Unless creditors have certainty that they will recover their loans, the risk of lending to MSMEs will be reflected in the pricing and availability of credit. We therefore strongly support UNCITRAL Working Group 5's work in developing legislative recommendations for micro and small enterprise insolvency. The World Bank has also issued new principles for MSE insolvency in its standard-setting instrument, the Principles for Effective Insolvency and Creditor-Debtor Regimes. We see these provisions coming at a critical time for states' consideration. As many of you know, the World Bank is the largest provider of financial and technical assistance to emerging markets and developing countries in the field of insolvency. This technical assistance has ranged from helping strengthen institutions, such as commercial courts and insolvency regulators, to developing legislative and regulatory tools to help rescue distressed firms and liquidate non-viable enterprises and so-called zombie firms. In light of our work, we see the UNCITRAL and World Bank instruments as important in assisting legislators develop more robust insolvency frameworks that can help mitigate creditor risk and better address the stigma of indebtedness. For instance, by helping ensure that small business entrepreneurs can have a fresh start. In addition, the institutions hope to scale up their joint work on implementation of legislative frameworks and are currently planning a series of judicial workshops in relation to best practice insolvency standards. We look forward to this important work being implemented and used in practice going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antonia. And again, here we are reminded of the macroeconomic impact of the work that we do at the microeconomic level to support individual small and medium-sized and micro enterprises. And as you note, the availability of finance to support their recovery does depend on enabling effective insolvency and restructuring, and we're very pleased to cooperate with the World Bank to support SMEs and micro businesses in this regard. I am told that we are trying again to get reach our colleague in Burkina Faso. In the meantime, though, we are going to hear from the other donor organisation I mentioned, GIZ, the German Cooperation Agency, and Ms. Fahira Brodlia, who is part of the Open Regional Fund for Southeast Europe on legal reform, is going to talk about the work that they do, again focusing here on largely on commercial dispute resolution. So, Fahira, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon, Chair, distinguished members. It is a privilege today of the work of the Open Regional Fund for Southeast Europe Legal Reform. This project.
Might I ask you to pause for here? I think we have a problem with the sound.
Is it clear now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So as I was saying, the project is commissioned by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development and aims to improve regional cooperation between the 6 Western Balkans countries to implement legal reforms in the framework of EU approximation. The countries of the Western Balkans are becoming increasingly involved in global trade, and as SMEs are the backbone of their economy, they must develop a stable and competitive economic framework. For over a decade, we have supported the regional cooperation and helped the countries in the region to achieve their national legal reform objectives. In the area of sales law, we focused on the promotion of the United Nations Convention on Contracts of International Sale of Goods, which is adopted by all the main trading partners in the Western Balkans region. And this means that even the SMEs who are engaged in cross-border transactions will have a harmonized legal framework at hand. In collaboration with UNCITRAL, we have enabled the inclusion of more CISG case law from the region into the UNCITRAL cloud database. In the area of dispute resolution, which is our main focus, we have pursued initiative and activities fostering the legal framework for alternative dispute resolution in the Western Balkans, both in business-to-business and more recently in investor-state relations. Over the years, we have tackled institutional practices, legislative reform, and capacity building to provide for improved access to justice and to strengthen the trust in the rule of law. In this process, the UNCITRAL instruments have played a key role of shaping the legislative and institutional framework for an investor-friendly climate in the Western Balkans. All of the states in the region have adopted arbitration legislation in line with the UNCITRAL model law, and furthermore, all of the states are signatories to the New York Convention through succession from the former Yugoslavia. More recently, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia became signatories of the Singapore Convention. On the institutional side, the arbitration centers in the region offer to conduct proceedings according to the UNCITRAL arbitration rules, which are widely accepted and promoted, along with the notes on organizing arbitral proceedings, which are always a useful guidance. Our project has also supported the adoption of the 2002 UNCITRAL model law on international conciliation, adopted by many states in the region. So in this context, it is our hope that the Singapore Convention will become the next pillar that will ensure a mediation-friendly environment and an attractive stabilizer for the enforcement of international settlement agreements. So why have the UNCITRAL instruments been such a useful tool? Well, it is really a matter of trust. Since the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, there have been many fostered mistrust among different stakeholders in the region. So due to their inclusive, universal, and neutral drafting processes, the UNCITRAL instruments played a key role in restoring the trust and engagement among businesses. So today, with the support provided by the project and in cooperation with UNCITRAL, the Western Balkans countries and institutions are more aware of the availability and benefits of ADR and the UNCITRAL instruments, which will be of crucial importance now in this unstable period after the COVID-19 crisis. Our efforts in these projects are also coordinated with our regional political partner, the Regional Cooperation Council, or RCC, and the World Bank Group, and we have benefited profoundly from strong relations with partner institutions and experts in the region. Now, lately, our project has focused on ISDS reform, which is of high importance on the agenda of UNCITRAL through its Working Group 3. First, we started with the promotion of the UNCITRAL transparency standards for the UNCITRAL transparency rules and MERS convention. Today, we are working intensively on the harmonization of the legal framework for investment protection, and we are focusing on the engagement of the Western Balkans governments in the ISDS reform process. After conducting a mapping of the existing ISDS structures in the region, we have proposed a specific activity in our forthcoming project to strengthen the communication channels between the state and foreign investors, which will hopefully then raise the likelihood of amicable settlement and early resolution of the disputes and issues that the investors face. And finally, in line with our holistic approach to the project, we are not only focusing on the end users, or the SMEs, but we are also focused on the awareness and capacity building, including collaboration with the universities in the region to support the studies of investment law. GIZ is convinced that further development and modernization of national policies, processes, and structures in the area of investment protection will push the Western Balkans ahead as an attractive investment area for small and larger businesses from the region and beyond. UNCITRAL will have an important role to play, and GIZ intends to continue in its role as a facilitator in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fahira. I think the sound dipped in and out, so I think particularly those listening other than in English that were unable to hear interpretation, we are delighted that we have a note of your remarks, which we'll make available for those who've been unable to listen to it. But just to highlight a point that you made that I think is very important, as well as the general concept of collaboration. That is, we have looked earlier on in this panel at what I might call the commercial law framework, the institutional aspects, and you've put the emphasis on the other area in which UNCITRAL seeks to support commerce, and that is through the transactional aspects. So dispute settlement and sale of goods, clearly highly relevant there. I am absolutely delighted to see our colleague from Burkina Faso online, and I hope that we're going to hear you very well, monsieur. Vous allez nous parler sur les mesures de soutien à PME.
Sir, you're about to tell us about support measures for SMEs, as well as OHADA text. You have the floor.
You have the floor, sir.
Ok, merci Madame la Présidente, Madame modératrice. Bonjour à toutes, bonsoir également.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I will be speaking about measures for MSMEs in Burkina Faso. Before doing so, though, the interpreter apologizes, but it is very difficult to distinguish the words coming from the panelist.
Diapo suivant.
Next slide, please.
Diapo, oui, suivant encore. Oui, c'est vrai que c'est en 2017, nous avons adopté la loi d'orientation et promotion des petites et moyennes entreprises au Burkina Faso. Il faut dire que cette loi-là, il y avait pas mal de dispositions qui étaient contenues dedans, notamment les dispositions qui ont été prises de façon commune par l'ensemble des États membres de l'UEMOA. Et dans ces dispositions, il était question de faciliter l'accès au financement des petites et moyennes entreprises en mettant en place des mécanismes de financement. C'était de garantir l'accès des petites et moyennes entreprises à la commande publique. Il y avait aussi la création des centres d'incubateurs aux petites et moyennes entreprises et l'accès également des PME à l'information sur les marchés publics communautaires. Il y avait dans la dernière partie la facilitation pour la fiscalité des petites et moyennes entreprises. Donc il faut dire que ces mesures étaient contenues et sont contenues dans la loi d'orientation de promotion des petites et moyennes entreprises qui a été adoptée depuis 2017. Et nous avons eu du mal un peu à mettre en application ces dispositions de la loi. Et il faut dire que c'est avec l'avènement de la Covid, nous, c'est vrai qu'on ne peut pas dire que c'est, comme on dit souvent, malheur, à toute chose, malheur est bon. Et c'est avec, bien sûr, cette loi et cette pandémie que nous avons pu opérationnaliser un certain nombre de dispositions qui sont contenues dans la loi de promotion des petites et moyennes entreprises au Burkina Faso. On peut passer au diapo suivant.
Next slide, please.
Donc, pour ce qui est des mesures, là, on retient principalement l'accès à la commande publique à hauteur de 15% au moins pour les petites et moyennes entreprises. Il y a également la fiscalité simplifiée aux petites et moyennes entreprises. Donc, les mesures qui ont été prises, c'est vrai qu'après, en mars 2020, lorsque le président du Faso a annoncé les différentes mesures pour pouvoir promouvoir les secteurs privés au Burkina Faso, il y a un certain nombre de mesures dont il a pris. Et ces mesures-là étaient relatives donc à la mise en place de fonds pour soutenir les petites et moyennes entreprises et les entreprises de façon générale. Donc, à titre de ces fonds-là, il a annoncé la mise en place d'un fonds de 100 millions qui devait servir à financer l'activité des entreprises au Burkina Faso, dont les petites et moyennes entreprises. Il faut dire que pour ce fonds de 100 millions qui a été annoncé par le chef de l'État, 40% de ces fonds, soit 40 milliards, étaient destinés uniquement aux petites et moyennes entreprises. À ce jour, nous pouvons dire que ces 40 milliards ont servi à financer. C'est vrai que nous avons, au niveau du département en charge des petites et moyennes entreprises, là, 2 lignes que nous avons mis en place à l'issue donc de ce fonds. Et ces 2 lignes-là, la première ligne, c'était de financer à hauteur de 70% les charges salariales et sociales des entreprises qui ont été touchées, fortement touchées par le Covid. Il faut dire que ces charges-là sont prises les 3. On couvrait 3 mois. Et aussi, nous avons accordé des crédits à des taux vraiment réduits aux petites et moyennes entreprises pour pouvoir redynamiser, financer leurs activités. Les taux accordés à ces petites et moyennes entreprises étaient de 3,5%. On peut passer au diapo suivant.
Next slide, please.
Et au diapo suivant encore, parce que ce sont des mesures qui sont contenues dans la loi. Je vais dire pourquoi nous avons mis ça dans les diapos suivants. Diapo suivant, oui. Oui, ici. Donc, je pense qu'il faut dire qu'avec l'avènement de la COVID, l'une des mesures que nous avons prises dans la loi d'orientation et de promotion des petites et moyennes entreprises, qui était l'accès des PME à la commande publique, là, a vu donc cette mesure être mise en œuvre. Il faut dire qu'avec la COVID, l'État, c'est vrai qu'on avait dit que 15% de la commande publique était réservée uniquement aux petites et moyennes entreprises. L'État, avec la crise sanitaire, a orienté la commande publique vers les petites et moyennes entreprises. Donc, en 2020, avec la crise en 2020, nous avons dépassé le seuil de 15%. Donc, c'est en gros 35,74% de la commande publique qui a été exécutée par les petites et moyennes entreprises. Il faut dire que c'était une situation qui était là et il fallait donc redonner et refinancer les petites et moyennes entreprises à travers cet instrument-là. Donc, tout ce qui était comme commande de l'État pour pouvoir lutter contre la COVID, notamment les commandes de cache-nez, les commandes de gel, solutions hydroalcooliques, tout ce qui est comme commande de médicaments, tout ça était accordé aux petites et moyennes entreprises. Donc, du coup, nous avons vu la part du marché des petites et moyennes entreprises augmenter. Aussi, il y a eu, en mars 2020, la mise en place de l'initiative de renforcement du capital politique des petites et moyennes entreprises qui évoluent dans le secteur de la pharmacie et des produits biomédicaux. Et ce programme a coûté 5 milliards et a permis de financer les petites et moyennes entreprises qui évoluaient dans la production des médicaments, dans la production des masques, dans la production des solutions hydroalcooliques et dans la production des, comment vous appelez ça, des savons qui étaient utilisés pour le nettoyage des mains. Il faut dire aussi qu'on a aussi vu avec la COVID là, la facilitation des formalités douanières et d'importation, surtout pour les entreprises qui évoluaient dans la production des médicaments, surtout. Et là, il y a une mesure qui avait été prise dans la loi d'orientation et de promotion des petites et moyennes entreprises, qui était que l'État puisse faciliter et diminuer un peu la fiscalité appliquée aux petites et moyennes entreprises. Avec la COVID, nous avons, avec les mesures de l'État, réduit la TVA pour les petites et moyennes entreprises, qui est passée de 18% à 10%. Et cette mesure, qui est une mesure fiscale, là, est toujours d'actualité. Nous avons également, dans la commande publique, dans les procédures de passation de la commande publique, allégé un certain nombre d'instruments. C'est vrai qu'il était demandé à ce que les petites et moyennes entreprises qui exécutaient les marchés publics là puissent livrer un certain nombre de documents. Et avec, bien sûr, la COVID, nous avons éliminé un certain nombre d'exigences, notamment les garanties qui étaient demandées aux petites et moyennes entreprises. Ces garanties étaient et sont interdites dorénavant dans les procédures de passation de commandes publiques, surtout réservées aux petites et moyennes entreprises. Nous avons relevé également les seuils de la commande publique pour que les entreprises, les petites et moyennes entreprises là, puissent avoir accès à ces commandes publiques. Donc voilà en gros ce que nous avons mis en œuvre au Burkina Faso pour pouvoir contrecarrer un peu la COVID-19 et aussi accroître la compétitivité de nos petites et moyennes entreprises. Il faut dire que pour ce qui est la simplification, pour ce qui est de la fiscalité et de la comptabilité, les petites et moyennes entreprises là, au Burkina Faso, surtout puisqu'on les catégorise à les micros, il y a les petites et les moyennes entreprises. Pour ce qui est les micros et les petites entreprises là, ils ne sont pas tenus de produire des bilans pour pouvoir donc déposer au niveau des impôts. Et ça, ce sont donc des facilités qui sont accordées aux petites et moyennes entreprises en matière donc de réglementation. Également, et pour la création d'entreprises, la facilitation de création d'entreprises, nous avons, l'État-gouvernement, nous avons fait un effort, passant donc du capital social pour les SARS et SARL. Nous sommes passés du capital social de 100 millions de 100 000 francs CFA à 5 000. Et aujourd'hui, à moins de 2 jours, nous créons donc une entreprise au niveau donc, du CFOR. Et il faut dire que la création également a été dématérialisée. Aujourd'hui, que nous soyons dans n'importe quel, situés dans n'importe quelle partie du globe, nous pouvons, à travers le site web du ministère, qui est le PEB, la porte d'entrée du Burkina Faso, créer une petite et moyenne entreprise au Burkina Faso. Donc, Madame la modératrice, voilà ce que j'avais à dire pour ce qui concerne donc les mesures qui ont été prises au Burkina Faso pour contrecarrer la COVID et puis aussi pour permettre à nos petites et moyennes entreprises d'être beaucoup plus résilientes. Merci beaucoup.
Merci énormément, monsieur. Je vais faire un
Thank you very much, sir.
continue in English because I think there were some difficulties with sound and interpretation, but I'd like to thank our colleague from Burkina Faso for reminding us of the public-private sector nexus here. The measures that Burkina Faso has taken to support the access of smaller enterprises to the public procurement markets are very important and a part of the package, and the relaxation and the reduction of the administrative burden and the financial burden of contracting with the government is a very important part, and similarly other measures to support smaller enterprises like the reduction of value-added tax are very important as part of the package. And finally, you noted the importance of electronic procurement systems, and those are aspects of the public procurement system that UNCITRAL has been working on for many years now. So thank you very much for sharing that very valuable experience. I see that we are running rather short of time. We've had a few interruptions for technical reasons. We have 2 more speakers, and I think that will take us to the end of time. I see that our colleague from Mexico is online. I am not sure if our colleague from India is online. So perhaps if our colleague from Mexico can raise his hand, we will pass. No, our colleague from India is online. So I would like to pass the floor to Ms. Mercy Ipao, who is the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of MSMEs in the Government in India, and she's going to highlight measures to support existing MSMEs and the development of new SMEs, especially in rural areas. And I will ask you please to be relatively brief in your comments given the time, and I apologise for having to do that. Madam, the floor is yours. Thank you. It seems we have lost the connection. Let's pass then to Mexico. If Mexico could raise the hand so we can pass the floor to Mexico, and we will come back to India if we can re-establish the connection. Our speaker from Mexico is Mr. Luis Mejan, who is a professor at ITAM, and he's also a delegate of Mexico to UNCITRAL's working groups 1 on MSMEs and 5 on insolvency. Sir, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you very much to UNCITRAL for allowing Mexico to make this presentation. I would like to touch on 2 points, as well as a presentation but I will shorten my presentation in light of speaking time limits. Madam Chair, then, what is the reality that MSMEs currently face in our country? And what is our visualization in light of the use of UNCITRAL instruments? So first of all, then, what is the actual reality on the ground for MSMEs, micro and small, medium-sized and micro and small enterprises in Mexico? These enterprises represent some 52% of GDP. And that comprises nearly 5 million companies, of which a third are formal and 2/3 are not formalized or not formal. These companies employ some 27 million individuals, which in turn represents nearly half of the working labor force in our country. What has the impact been then during the crisis on this sector? Perhaps we could move on to the next slide, please. Next one. Yes. Out of that total of 4.9 million companies during COVID-19, 3.9 million survived, which means that we lost nearly 1 million companies. And over the last 18 months of the pandemic, there's been an increase of nearly 619,000 new companies created. Of the million companies that were forced to close, roughly 1/3 were formal enterprises, and 2/3 of them were in the informal sector. Of the 80% that survived, only some 26% are formalized. If we could skip on to the next 2 slides, please. Thank you very much. That's it. Bringing us to conclusions. The conclusion of this presentation is that the pandemic has had a strong impact. There is, however, the prospect of recovery, and this is something that we've seen. If 1 million disappeared, but 620,000 new companies have been set up. So we perhaps should focus on the following issue in terms of economic recovery. We need to try and formalize as many MSMEs as possible, those which are still in the informal sector, because the heft that they represent, their economic weight, is very significant. If we move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. I would just like to underscore the relevance in this regard of the various instruments that have been disseminated and established within working groups 1 and 5 of UNCITRAL. Instruments which were presented during this session of the Commission's plenary. Working Group 1 presented a legislative guide on facilitating the registration and access of MSMEs. And this is fundamental, because as part of our efforts to establish a simplified regime in Mexico, in the current regime, we were only able to cover 37,000 of the million or so companies, and therefore we needed assistance in the form of such an instrument, this instrument that was created by Working Group 1. Moving then to Working Group 5, Working Group 5 provided us with a simplified insolvency regime, which we can use. During the pandemic, we really have pooled efforts in order to establish a simplified insolvency regime back home. But unfortunately, efforts were stalled in Congress, and therefore the contributions made by the United Nations in this regard, in the form of these two instruments, really will map out the road to follow, which will allow us to hopefully mitigate the bad impact of the pandemic and help support our companies. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mejaran. I think just to emphasize something you said that I found remarkable, and that is that over 50% of GDP and almost half of the working population is in the informal sector, echoing something that our colleague from the Côte d'Ivoire said, and the importance, therefore, of formalising this sector of the economy to allow it to access all the opportunities that businesses can have, and UNCITRAL's work in allowing MSMEs to register in a simplified way and simplified procedures for insolvency, how important those are. So thank you for that. Now we have just a few minutes left, and I'm delighted that we seem to have our colleague from India online. Madam Merci Epau, the floor is yours, and might I ask you again I'm sorry to ask you, but to speak relatively quickly. Thank you very much. Have we just lost the connection again? Okay. I'm sorry, we seem to have trouble with the connection, but I just want to highlight a couple of points that India wanted to raise, and they're very important points in the context of our discussions this morning, because they're looking at, the proportion of MSMEs and the informal sector, and that they are the background of the Indian economy, and the efforts that the government of India has set up using cluster approaches, promoting economic activities, supporting debts through various tools of making debt available, subordinating debt, and guaranteeing trust funds and so forth, together with insolvency measures. And I think, have we re-established the connection? If we can, we will hand the floor. No, I think the connection has gone again. I think in the interests of time, I think it is going to be very difficult to re-establish and allow India to speak, and I very, very much regret that, because it's a very significant part of the developing world in terms of size and population and experience to share. But we will make available the remarks on the website, as I have said, so that we can see the experience from India. With that, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to draw this first of the two panels to a conclusion. And I just want to highlight a couple of things that we've heard. We've heard from the Côte d'Ivoire about the importance, both in terms of scale and social importance, of the informal sector and MSMEs, and the need for formalisation and registration, a point that Mexico emphasised. And this is indeed to allow MSMEs to access many of the schemes of credit and support that the governments are making available. As has been so aptly pointed out, the government can't simply put money on the table for anybody who wishes to come and help themselves. It is our money. We are all taxpayers and citizens. And so these measures are so important, allowing MSMEs to be formalised. We've heard from Thailand about a mechanism to offer simple dispute resolution proceedings through mediation for those MSMEs who are in financial difficulties and the need for them to be able to restructure. From Colombia, similarly, the importance of measures on simplified insolvency proceedings and where they have used the UNCITRAL texts to address those. And from Burkina Faso, a different point, the importance of having the public sector regulatory provisions, including through public procurement, available to provide meaningful market access to this important sector of the economy to MSMEs. We were hoping to hear more about the emergency credit line guarantee and support for rural MSMEs in India, but we will have to postpone that for another time. They were also going to talk about the importance of insolvency processes once again, and as we've heard from the World Bank, how important those are from also the macroeconomic aspect and allowing future access to credit. And dispute resolution 2 was emphasised by our colleagues from GIZ and the work that we have been doing to support an effective dispute settlement mechanism in terms of both developing the economy generally and attracting investment. And we've heard from both those organisations of the benefits to countries of collaboration between international organisations and donor and aid agencies, again emphasised by our colleague from Côte d'Ivoire. So just in concluding, Mr. Chairman, these have been inspirational testimonies about the practices, the good practices and experience from all around the world that we have heard to support MSMEs. We've heard too about the size and scale of MSMEs, that they may exceed 90%, in some cases 99% of businesses across the world. They employ a huge number of people, not all are formalised. And so if we don't allow these smaller businesses to be able to grow, then economic recovery from the incredible shocks we've had from the pandemic is going to be that much more difficult. We are delighted from the UNCITRAL perspective to collaborate with both other donor agencies and also to work with individual states, and we are very pleased to receive requests and handle requests to the extent that we can to provide the support where we can. And we've been very pleased to hear too the emphasis on the benefits of UNCITRAL texts in practice. And I just want to make one other point. We heard also earlier on in this session about the climate change emergency and net zero emissions, and I hope therefore that we will be able to bring all of this work together so we can support all three pillars of the Sustainable Development Goals: economic, social and environmental. So with that, I'd like to thank heartily everybody who was able to connect, for everybody's patience in trying to connect, for sharing such interesting experience, and above all for those listening and to be able to take these experience further. So thank you very much for this panel. We will now have a 2-minute break because we need just to rejig the technical systems, and we will then come back for the UNCITRAL Day celebration. So